Let's get one thing straight. Medieval castles were cold. Not grab a blanket cold, but see your breath indoors cold. These were stone boxes built to survive sieges, not to comfort guests. There was no central heating, no radiators, and definitely no warm duvets with goose feathers and thermal sheets. So how did they do it? How did people in these drafty, freezing fortresses manage to sleep through the night without turning into human icicles? Today, we're stepping into the shadows, into the chill of the past, to find out how medieval people didn't just endure the cold. They made it through the night. Barely. When we picture medieval castles, we often imagine warm candlelight flickering on tapestries, banquets in great halls, and nobles lounging in fur-lined robes. But the truth? Most castles were brutally uncomfortable at night, especially in winter. Behind those thick stone walls was a world colder than many winter forests. No insulation, no double glazing, just raw stone, open corridors, and wind that whistled through the cracks like a warning. Sleeping in a castle wasn't romantic. It was a nightly struggle, and surviving the cold was as important as surviving your enemies. Let's start with the basic problem: stone. Castles were made of it for a reason. Stone is fireproof, it's durable, it's great against arrows and battering rams, but it's also a terrible insulator. Unlike wood or mud brick, stone absorbs cold like a sponge. And once cold, it stays that way for hours, sometimes days. Even if you lit a fire in a room, the heat would vanish the moment the flames died. Now imagine this: thick stone walls, sometimes 10 feet deep, surrounding you on all sides. A high ceiling, small windows, if any, no carpets, no insulation. Just slabs of rock, echoing your footsteps, radiating the chill of the earth. And the layout didn't help. Great halls were massive open spaces. Bedchambers were perched in towers, high above the ground, where winds blew strongest. Spiral staircases acted like wind tunnels. And the only thing stopping a midnight breeze were heavy wooden doors and tapestries, if you could afford them. In short, castles were built to keep enemies out, not to keep heat in. And it wasn't just the stone. The design itself contributed to the cold. Most rooms weren't sealed shut. They were part of a network of chambers and hallways that allowed drafts to sneak in from every direction. Open courtyards let the wind into the very center of the castle. So at night, when the sun set and the fires dimmed, the cold became a silent invader, unseen, unstoppable, and absolutely everywhere. In most medieval castles, the closest thing to heating was an open hearth, just a big stone fireplace, if you were lucky. If not, just a small fire pit in the center of the room. These fireplaces were inefficient. They filled the air with smoke. They struggled to warm even the immediate space, let alone a whole room with 20-foot ceilings. Worse yet, there were no chimneys before the 12th century. Smoke just drifted upward, hoping to escape through holes in the wall or ceiling. Most of it didn't. So what did they do? They relied on bedroom fires, called chamber hearths, but only the wealthy had them. Servants and lower-ranking members of the household often slept in cold, unheated side rooms, or even hallways without any fire at all. For those with means, they used braziers, metal bowls filled with hot coals. These could warm a room slightly, but they came with danger. Hot coals in a wooden room, you see the problem. Fires were common, so were burns. And then there was the smoke. More than one person in medieval history died, not from freezing, but from carbon monoxide inhalation in a poorly ventilated room. Still, the brazier glowed, the fire cracked, and for a brief moment, warmth returned, enough to take off your boots and pray for morning. Now we get to the real medieval survival weapon: the bed with curtains. These weren't just fancy royal furniture. The four-poster bed with heavy drapes existed for one reason: to keep warmth in. Imagine a tent inside a stone room wrapped in layers of thick fabric. That's what these beds were. The curtains weren't aesthetic, they were functional. At night, you pulled them shut, sealing yourself off from the rest of the freezing room. The warmth of your body, and maybe one or two others, was trapped inside this cocoon of cloth. But it gets better. Wealthier families lined the curtains with wool or fur. Some even used felted wool blankets, thick as rugs, as extra insulation. The bed itself was raised, sometimes several feet off the cold floor, to avoid drafts that slithered along the stone. And the mattress? A sack filled with straw or feathers. Not exactly memory foam, but it held warmth. And most importantly, it stayed dry. Families often doubled up, 2, 3, even 4 people in one bed. Children slept with siblings. Servants slept with other servants. Warmth was more important than personal space. You didn't sleep spread out, you curled up, tight, knees tucked in, arms wrapped around your chest. It wasn't comfort, it was containment. And once you were in, you didn't get out until daylight. Let's be clear. Surviving a castle night wasn't something you did alone, especially not if you were nobility. Enter the servants, specifically the night servants. These men and women had one goal: make sure your master didn't freeze. And they did this in ways both clever and exhausting. First, they prepared the bedchamber. Hours before bedtime, a servant would light a fire carrying coals and set up the brazier. They'd warm bedstones, flat rocks heated by fire, and tuck them into the mattress to preheat it. They'd boil water and pour it into metal bottles or ceramic jars, which were wrapped in cloth and slid under the sheets like medieval hot water bottles. Next, the blankets, thick wool, sometimes fur, always layered. Servants would fluff the mattress, smooth the linen sheets, if any, and fold extra coverings at the feet. And then they stayed in the room all night, listening, waiting, sometimes sleeping upright in a chair near the door. Why? To refill the brazier, to add logs to the fire, to bring warm water if needed, to fetch another blanket if their lord stirred. Their job didn't end when their master fell asleep. In many ways, that's when it began. Even nobles weren't immune to cold. Chronic coughs, inflamed joints, winter fevers. The best remedy wasn't a doctor. It was a competent servant with a pile of warm rocks and a pot of boiled wine. Some noble women even had warming stools, wooden frames lined with iron, filled with embers. They sat on these during evening prayers or reading. Others wrapped their legs in sheepskin wraps or fur-lined boots, which never left their bedside. In short, the comfort of one person was often built on the labor of 3 or 4 others. You might think that nobles had it better when it came to sleeping warm. And in some ways they did: larger beds, thicker blankets, personal fires. But here's the twist. Castle architecture often made their rooms colder. Noble bedchambers were located in the upper floors of towers, farther from the earth's natural warmth, more exposed to wind, and often built with large windows to show off wealth. These windows, of course, had no glass. At best, they had wooden shutters or thin oiled cloth. So while lords and ladies had help, fires lit, beds warmed, servants watching, the cold still reached them, sometimes worse than the poor sleeping below. Servants, squires, kitchen boys, they often slept near the kitchen hearth, in basements or in inner quarters, where the stone retained a bit of daytime warmth. Some even curled up beside livestock in castle stables, because body heat, whether from a cow or a cousin, was better than none. The warmth to status equation wasn't linear. In castles, warmth came from location, not luxury. And in that irony lies the truth. Cold didn't respect rank. It seeped through stone, slipping beneath doors, and chilled everyone equally, unless you were lucky enough to sleep above a bakery. Now let's talk about the real survivors, the people who didn't even get to lie down. The night guards, the watchmen, the men posted along the ramparts, the gatehouses, the towers. These weren't soldiers in gleaming armor. They were often young, poorly fed, and wrapped in layers of mismatched wool. Their job? Not fall asleep, not freeze, not die. They walked the walls, stood watch for hours, sat on stone benches with the wind slicing across the battlements. There were no braziers, no beds, just the occasional torch, and even that was rare. So how did they survive? They moved, constantly. They stamped their feet, swung their arms, huddled near each other like birds on a branch. Some chewed dead cloves or strong herbs to stay awake. Others whispered prayers with every breath, hoping the sun would rise faster. Sometimes they rotated every 2 hours. Sometimes they didn't. A few castles kept fire pots near watch stations, metal bowls with coals. But carrying one up the spiral staircase was risky and cumbersome. Many guards wrapped hot stones in cloth and tucked them under their cloaks. Others carried flasks of spiced wine or ale, not to get drunk, but to keep the blood moving. Alcohol didn't warm them, but it made them forget how cold they were. And if they failed, if they nodded off, if they abandoned post, punishment could be swift. For them, the cold wasn't just a discomfort. It was a test, one you couldn't afford to fail. Because if you fell asleep and an enemy entered, everyone paid the price. So how did people sleep in medieval castles without freezing to death? The answer is barely. They didn't sleep in comfort. They slept in layers, in groups, in silence, in dread of cold winds that came down from tower staircases like ghosts. They built fires that smoked, carried rocks that burned, and pulled curtains that barely blocked the chill. They relied on servants to bring heat, on animals to share warmth, and on each other to endure. And still, some didn't make it. Winter deaths were common. Fevers turned fatal. Infirmity meant exposure. And exposure in a medieval castle was often a death sentence. But they endured, because that's what humans do. They adapt. They wrap themselves in everything they can find: wool, ash, ritual, tradition, and they pass those survival tricks down, generation to generation, one cold night at a time. So the next time you pull a blanket over your shoulders or turn up the thermostat, remember, somewhere in the past, someone was trying to sleep on stone, with smoke in their lungs and frost in their breath. And they made it, not because they were warm, but because they were determined. And sometimes that's enough.